Hi everyone, my name is Marta Buczkowska and today I've got with me
Katerina Sekelaropoulou.
We are both third-year student dietitians at Newcastle University, and next September we'll be going to our fourth year, and meaning we will be starting our master year. Today we've got a vegetarian and vegan diet presentation for you. We are very excited to deliver that session for you. We hope you will learn some new things and you'll be able to use some tips and tricks that we present today in your own cooking. So we thought it's nice to start with some numbers. So a quick overview for you about plant-based diets. So the number of people following a vegan diet quadrupled between 2014 and now. In the UK, people ate 17% less meat in 2019 than they did in 2008. And currently, around 4.5% of the UK population follow a vegan or vegetarian diet. And if you have a look here on the right-hand side at the little bar chart, we can see that vegetarian and pescatarian diets are the two most popular plant-based diets in the UK, and they're closely followed by a vegan diet. So if you summarized all of the people who follow a vegan, vegetarian, or a pescatarian diet, you can see that the number of people who cut out meat from their everyday diet is quite significant in the UK.
So here we have an overview of the plant-based diets. So people following a plant-based diet consume more plant-based foods. This can be fruits, vegetables, whole grains, pulses, nuts, and seeds. But following a plant-based diet does not necessarily mean cutting out all animal-based products completely. Here we have different types of plant-based diets. For example, we have flexitarianism, where people consume small amounts of meat. Pescatarians usually consume fish. Lacto-vegetarianism is milk and eggs. Ovo-vegetarianism is eggs, and lacto-vegetarianism is milk. And last but not least, we have veganism with no animal products at all. So reasons for following a plant-based diet can vary. Some people might be following one for sustainability reasons, for health concerns, animal welfare, religion, or peer influence.
So before we start delving into more detail regarding vegan diets and plant-based diets, we thought it's worth introducing the Eat Well guide, both for animal-based Eat Well guide and the vegan one. So Eat Well guide is a guide developed by the British government, and it's supposed to be like an instruction on how our everyday diet should look like. So it resembles a little plate, and if you have a look, both of these plates, the animal-based one and the vegan one, are quite similar. They both have the same sections, it's just the type of food inside those sections that differs. So we have the green section on the left-hand side, and it contains fruits and vegetables. So they can either be frozen, fresh, or tinned. If we go further, we've got the yellow section, which shows our carbohydrates. So we've got the bread, potatoes, rice, chapatis, porridge, bagels, and so on. And if you have a look at the bottom of the plates, we've got the pinky section and the blue section. So the pink one shows protein and the blue one shows dairy and alternatives for the animal-based Eat Well guide, whereas for the vegan one, the blue section just shows calcium-rich foods. So if we go and have a closer look into those sections that I just mentioned, we can start with the pink one, so our protein. So in the animal-based Eat Well guide, the protein section consists of fish, red meat, eggs, poultry, but also nuts, chickpeas, lentils, and beans. If you have a look at the vegan one, it differs slightly because it doesn't contain any animal products at all. So we don't have the eggs, we don't have the fish or the meat. So what do we have inside? If you have a look here, we've got the seeds, we've got nuts, peanut butter, tofu, chickpeas, beans, and lentils. If we go to the blue section, so for example, the calcium-rich foods in the vegan Eat Well guide, we can find plant-based alternatives. They need to be fortified, and what that means, Katarina will explain a bit later. So we've got oat drink, we've got soy drink, and soy yogurt. And on the right-hand side, we've got animal-based Eat Well guide. So we've got our dairy and alternatives. So we've got semi-skim milk, we've got spreadable cheese, we've got hard cheese, yogurt, and so on. But what about vegetarian people? So when it comes to protein, besides all the products included in the vegan section, they also consume eggs. And they obviously consume the dairy and alternatives as well.
So we started talking a bit about protein. Maybe this is the first thing that comes to mind when we think about, well, if I follow a vegan or vegetarian diet, how do I get my protein? Where are my protein sources? So I'm gonna ask you, what are the sources of protein in our everyday life? If you can have a couple seconds, think about the vegan, vegetarian sources that we might currently be having. So first of all, here I have milk. I have both soy and cow's milk. Moving on, I have beans and pulses. I have eggs. We have different types of nuts, different types of cheese, tofu, yogurt, and something that many of you might have not thought about is actually our bread, rice, and pasta. But how much content do they have? So here I have a table of different protein sources, their weight, and how much protein each one of them has. So I have soy milk per 100 ml is 3 grams of protein, and semi-skimmed milk from cows, the SSM means semi-skimmed milk, is 3.6 grams of protein. And we can see that it's quite close, but I want you to pay close attention because I took the example of soy milk alternative. If we're using oat milk, coconut milk, or other types of milk alternatives, the protein content is going to be different. Soy is the highest protein that we have currently. Moving on, we have tofu with a staggering 16 grams of protein per 100 grams. Again, soy yogurt, 4 grams, which is quite high, and cow's natural yogurt is 9 grams. And then, as I mentioned before, we have bread and pasta, with one slice of bread having 4 grams of protein. So if you think about having 2 slices of bread and something in between, it might be hummus and some vegetables or anything that you prefer, just by the 2 slices of bread when you have the toasty, it's 8 grams of protein, which is quite high. So moving on, how much protein do we actually need? So the recommendations for healthy adults is to consume at least 0.75 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And if we want to build and maintain muscle, that goes then to 1.4 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. That sounds like a bunch of numbers, but it's going to make more sense in a little bit. So here I have created a table with different weights and how much protein they need if they're healthy adults. So these are calculating with the 0.75 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And to get you thinking, here I have a little example. So here I have Magdalena. Magdalena is a scientist here at Newcastle University. She currently weighs 78 kilograms, but how much protein does she need? What are we going to do to find out how much protein does she need? So we're going to do 78 times 0.75, and that's going to give us a number very close to 59 grams of protein per day. Actually, though, Magdalena started working out, and she now wants to build and maintain muscle. So is her protein going to change? Yes, of course it's going to change. And now she's going to need 109 to 156 grams of protein per day. It's quite tricky when we talk about protein for vegan and vegetarian diets. We want to be, especially for vegan diets, we want to be mentioning complementary protein. So I know this might sound a bit strange, what is complementary protein? So I want you to think that our body needs 9 essential amino acids, and I want you to think of them as bricks. So we need 9 bricks for us to build muscle and for our body to register what we're having as protein. So when we have those 9 essential amino acids, so those 9 bricks, our body is able to build strong muscles and is able to recognize that what we're having is a protein source. But sometimes one of those bricks might be missing. So what happens then? So that's when complementary protein comes in. So if there's anything that I wanted to remember from the slide is this. So we have those 4 categories on the right-hand side. We have legumes, grains, nuts and seeds, and vegetables. So essentially, what one of them is missing. For example, in legumes, we're missing 2 different amino acids, so 2 bricks. We can gain them from combining them with grains or combining them with nuts and seeds or vegetables. Or again, if we have in grains, we can combine them with vegetables or nuts and seeds or legumes to make that complete protein and have that complete building block and that complete wall of protein. I'm going to give you some example, and I think it's going to make it even more clear. So here we have our beloved beans on toast. So the beans are legumes and the toast is grains. So together they make complementary protein. So our body is able to utilize that protein to build strong muscle. Later on, we have soy yogurt with granola and fruits. So again, granola consists of oats, so it's a type of grain, and then it has nuts and seeds as well. So that's complementary protein. Here we have tofu with rice, peanut butter and bread, our beloved chickpea curry with rice and naan bread. So again, chickpeas are legumes and the rice is grains. And of course, last but not least, we have hummus. Hummus actually is made from chickpeas and it also has sesame paste. So chickpeas are legumes and sesame paste is nuts and seeds. So together it's already a complete protein on its own. So this means that our body, whenever we're having hummus, it's able to identify all those 9 essential amino acids and is able to build protein inside our body.
So probably the other thing that you think when you talk about vegan diet is iron. So iron is needed for us for energy. So if we don't consume enough iron, we are at risk of iron deficiency anemia, which is related with fatigue and not being able to get energy to do a lot of stuff or being sick often and so on. So it's quite important to mention iron when we talk about plant-based diets. And there are 2 different forms of iron. So we've got heme iron and non-heme iron. But what does it actually mean? So heme iron is the form of iron that we can find in animal-based foods. So it's easier to absorb for our body. And it's mostly found in red meat, eggs, fish, or offal. When it comes to non-heme iron, it's the primary type of iron found in plant-based foods. It's way more difficult to absorb than the heme iron, and it's mostly found in pulses, legumes, seeds, grains, cereal, or millet. So there are a few things that we can actually do to make iron absorption a bit easier on a plant-based diet. So first thing that we wanted to cover today is vitamin C and iron. So we've got some culinary tips for you to utilize. So you can add spinach, bell pepper, fresh orange juice, berries, or fresh parsley to your dishes. And all of them are great sources of vitamin C. And they make the non-heme iron absorption a bit easier for our body. And the other thing that not a lot of us might have heard before is tea and coffee. So actually there are some chemicals in tea and coffee that can make it a bit more difficult for the non-heme iron to be absorbed. So it's recommended that we don't consume tea or coffee half an hour before and half an hour after a meal when we had non-heme iron. So we have a little nice diagram for you to remember the vitamin C and non-heme iron rule. So we've got a bunch of spinach and we've got bell pepper. So they're great sources of vitamin C. If we consume them with great sources of non-heme iron, such as kidney beans or nuts, our body is nice and happy and it can consume non-heme iron a bit better. There are a few other nutrients that we wanted to cover with you today. They're especially important from the vegan diet perspective. So first of all, we've got calcium. We need calcium for nice and healthy bones, and it's recommended that we should aim for around 3 to 4 portions of calcium-rich products per day. So if you remember back in a few slides, we had this little blue section of the Eat Well guide. So this is when the calcium-rich products come in. But what actually is a portion? So a portion is 30 grams of cheese. So if you imagine a box of matches, it's this size of cheese, more or less. It's also 4 tablespoons of yogurt, 30 grams of nuts, or 200 mils of milk, so like a glass. And if you have a look here on the right-hand side in the little blue table, we've got vegetarian sources of calcium and vegan sources of calcium. So our dairy products, such as milk, yogurts, cheese, which are consumed on a vegetarian diet, are great sources of calcium. But if you have a look on the vegan sources, we've listed a few more vegan sources of calcium, but it doesn't mean that they're better sources, unfortunately, because they contain less calcium than the vegetarian sources. However, in the vegan sources, we've got fortified plant-based milks and yogurts, fortified tofu, almonds, chia seeds, and edamame. And edamame is the version of young soybeans. When it comes to the other nutrients that is very, very crucial for you to remember, we've got vitamin B12 for brain health. So it's not such a concern on a vegetarian diet because we consume it in cheese, eggs, or milk. However, it might be a bit more tricky to meet our requirements when we follow a vegan diet. We can find some vitamin B12 in fortified plant-based milks or yogurt and tofu or in nutritional yeasts. However, it's strongly recommended that vegans should supplement B12. We should supplement 10 micrograms per day. You can also find it under 10 UG per day. And we've got a little example from Boots, but you can find it in most health shops or pharmacies and bigger supermarkets as well. So we've got 3 more nutrients for you today. So let's start with zinc. So zinc is needed for strong immunity and strong hair and nails. We can find it in beans, chickpeas, seeds, wholemeal bread, and nuts. So it's quite similar to iron. If you remember, the sources are quite similar. We've got iodine. So iodine is needed for a nice and healthy thyroid. Naturally, it's found in seaweed. So seaweed can be found in sushi or Asian type of soups like ramen or miso soups. However, it's a bit tricky when it comes to seaweed because we cannot really estimate the iodine content of the seaweed because it depends where it was grown. And sometimes it can be very high and it's easy to eat too much of iodine when we consume seaweed. So normally in European countries, iodine is usually fortified in salt, so it's not such a big issue. However, in the UK, unfortunately, the salt is not iodinized, so supplementation again is recommended. And lastly, we've got omega-3s, so we need them for a healthy brain and hormonal balance. We can find them in chia seeds, ground linseeds, or walnuts. However, realistically, how much of these products do you consume every day? Probably not that much. So supplementation again is recommended.
So Marta mentioned before when we were talking about dairy and dairy alternatives about fortified products. But what does fortification mean? So it means that we want to increase the content of at least one nutrient to improve the nutritional quality. What nutrients do we usually fortify food with? So we have vitamin B12, iron, vitamin D, calcium, and B vitamins such as B1 and B3. We are very fortunate to be living in the UK because bread and flour here is fortified. Same applies to the cereal that we're having for breakfast or any other foods that are made with flour. They're all fortified. I wanted to look at the 2 packages of tofu that I have here. So these 2 brands are fortified with calcium, and same goes for the 2 soy milk alternatives that I have on the bottom of the slide. So if you're wondering how am I going to know if a product is fortified or not, because they don't always mention that right there at the front of the package. So at the bottom of the slide, I have an ingredients list, and I have highlighted where you can find on the ingredients if it's fortified or not. So here, this is for a milk alternative made from soy, and we have calcium carbonate, which means that it's fortified with calcium, and then we have potassium iodine and vitamins B2, B12, and vitamin D, which is the sun vitamin. And then on the right-hand side, I have a nutritional label. So here we can see that after the salt content, it says vitamins, and it has vitamin D, riboflavin, which is B2, B12, and minerals such as calcium. So this is how we can find out if something is fortified, if it doesn't show on the package directly or it doesn't have a sticker on it. So one thing that I want you to remember from here is that whenever we're having a product such as milk that is fortified with calcium, for example, soy milk that I have here, I want you to remember that we have to shake it. We have to shake it and to make sure that all the calcium goes in throughout the bottle, because calcium tends, when it's fortified, to stay at the bottom of the liquid. So because we want to be having calcium with every time we're using that milk, we want to be shaking the bottle to make sure that it's nice and incorporated everywhere. Moving on, I want to talk a bit about organic products and fortification. So organic products don't allow the usage of additives or fortification, but what does this actually mean? Do you remember before we talked a bit about B vitamins? Well, there's not going to be any B vitamins in organic products. Or vitamin D? None. Iron? There's no iron in organic products. Neither is calcium. So if you're thinking about following a vegan or a vegetarian diet, it's very, very important to making sure that you're getting enough calcium, iron, and all the other nutrients that Marta mentioned before. Sometimes fortification is the easiest way to get it. But if we're choosing, of course, organic yogurts or organic tofu, they're not going to be fortified. So this is something to definitely consider.
So we also wanted to mention processed foods in veganism, because if you go shopping, you probably have seen the expansion of the different processed foods that we can find that are labeled as vegan or plant-based. So there are a few things that we wanted to pay special attention to. These are salt content, saturated fat content, and the traffic light system. So how can we actually know if something that we are buying is quite high in salt or high in saturated fat? So this is when traffic light system comes in. So you might have seen it on the food package or on the food labels when you go to the supermarket or when you buy things online. So it just shows us a little summary of the fat, saturated fat, sugar, and salt content of the product. So it's recommended that we aim for the green labels. We limit the amber and try to avoid the red label as much as we can. It doesn't really mean that we shouldn't eat it at all. It's just something to be mindful of. So we have a little table for you here. So if you have a look, we've got vegan processed foods products and their salt content. So what I did here is I took something that's recommended as a portion. So for example, 2 vegan sausages are 1 portion of vegan processed food. And the same goes with 2 slices of vegan cheese, vegan kebab, or veggie burger. So if you have a look at the salt content, they all have more than 1 gram of salt, and vegan kebab even has 1.5 grams of salt in 1 portion. But what does it really mean? So it's recommended that we should have a maximum of 5 grams of salt every day, which is equal to 1 teaspoon. And this goes not only for the salt that we are adding at the table, but also the one we can find in cheese, bread, pasta, ready meals, whatever you can think of, crisps, for example. So if you think of our five allowed grams per day, we can think about them as 5 little shakes of salt. So if we have 1 portion of vegan processed food, it basically means that we used 1 of the 5 allowed salt shakes per day. So this is just something to keep in mind. When it comes to dairy cheese versus plant-based cheese, this is again quite a hot topic, especially recently. So dairy cheese, as we mentioned before, is quite rich in protein and calcium, so it's a great source of both of these nutrients. However, it becomes more tricky when we talk about plant-based cheese, because they're usually made of coconut oil, which is very high in fat, low in protein and calcium. So if you have a look here at the bottom of the screen, you can see that coconut oil actually is at the 2nd place in the ingredient list, which means that the producer used a lot of coconut oil to make the the vegan cheese. And if you have a look here on the right-hand side, we've got the nutritional information per 100 grams of cheese. So this is around 3 slices of vegan cheese. So a portion of 100 grams provides us with 21 grams of saturated fat, no protein at all, and 2.3 grams of salt, which is actually a lot more than the processed foods that we've seen on the previous slide. But why we shouldn't really be consuming saturated fat, you might be asking yourself. So saturated fat, if we consume a lot of them over longer periods of time, can lead to increased risk of heart disease and heart complications. So just something to be mindful of. However, we realize it's important not to demonize any of the foods because all of us like to eat processed foods from time to time. So we had a look on the internet and we found some of the better options for the processed foods. So we've got chicken pieces, mince, and different types of mince. So all of them are lower in salt, lower in saturated fat, high in fiber. And the one from Vivera is also fortified with iron and B12. We also wanted to highlight here that corn, the mince that we have here on the slide, is actually not vegan, it's vegetarian because it uses eggs. So it makes it not vegan, but it makes it more rich in protein at the same time.
So moving on, we have some tips and tricks as promised at the beginning to make your meals more nutritious and tastier. So here I have linseeds, or you might have heard them as flax seeds. So what they do is when we mix 1 tablespoon of flax seeds with 2 tablespoons of water and we let it sit for a bit, it is actually equivalent to 1 egg. So it can be used for baking. For example, you can add them to cakes, pancakes, muffins, or even bread. So here on the right-hand side, we have the flax seeds and how they're gonna become once we add water. So you see that gooey, almost of an eggy consistency there. Moving on, we have one of my favorites, which is chia seeds, and you can make chia puddings by adding any milk or milk alternatives that you want, any fruit or sweetener, and just add the chia seeds overnight, and then the next day you're gonna have a great chia pudding. You can add chia seeds to your smoothies, yogurt, porridge, overnight oats, and bread. And as Marta mentioned before, they are very high in omega-3. Last but definitely not least, we have nuts. And you can add them to your stir fry, porridge, yogurt, salads. We especially love walnuts in our salad. They're very, very tasty. And cashew nuts are really nice on a stir fry. So we definitely recommend them.
We also have nutritional yeasts. So I mentioned them when I talked about B12. So they are used as cheese alternative. So we can use them as we would use cheese, grated cheese. So we can sprinkle them on top of our pasta, lasagna, rice, add it to soups or sauces as well. It's best to do it when the dish is quite hot or warm because it blends nicely, it melts, and it just makes the dish more tasty. And lastly, we've got tofu. So we had loads of conversations with different people, and not everyone knows what to do with tofu. And tofu is usually associated with something quite bland and something that people do not really enjoy. So we just thought it's worth summarizing some of the ideas for tofu here. So we can add it to our pasta or stir fries, as well as rice or soups. We can make scrambled tofu, and we have an example here on the right. It's scrambled tofu. We can also blend it in our pancake dough to boost the protein content, or use it as an egg replacement in cakes, for example. So lastly, we've got some useful resources for you. So we've got plant-based diet food fact sheet from British Dietetic Association and one Blue Dot document, which talks a bit about plant-based diets and sustainability.
So moving on, we have some recipes for you that you might want to try. First of all, we have huevos rancheros. So huevos rancheros, we can see here that we have the tortilla, we have some black beans, we have feta cheese, we have the egg. And if you remember previously from the previous slides, when we have pulses and grains, this means it's complementary protein. So we have all 9 essential blocks to build that protein. And the tortilla and the beans have protein, they have fiber, iron, calcium, and magnesium. We have healthy fats from the avocado. We have protein, vitamin B2, B12, and iron from the egg, vitamin C from the tomato, and protein and calcium from the feta cheese. Here we have the ingredients for one portion, so if you want to just pause the video now. And here we have the recipe, a step-by-step recipe.
We also have an idea for a vegan meal. So we veganized the traditional spaghetti meatball pasta. So here we've used the vegan mince to make the meatballs. And we also use spaghetti and nutritional yeast. So this provides us with protein. It's complementary because we've got pasta and tomato sauce, which is vegetable. We also have iron, vitamin B, zinc, magnesium, calcium, fiber, and vitamin C and vitamin B12 because of our nutritional yeasts. And we also have an ingredient list and also recipe. So thank you all for listening today. We hope it was useful for you. If you have a look at the first slide, you can find our email. So if you ever have any questions or queries, you can always message us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.